Alex Parker stood behind the counter of Parker's Bistro, the familiar scent of lemongrass and garlic clinging to his chef's jacket. The dinner rush had passed, and the kitchen had fallen into that rare lull where silence felt sacred. Outside, Seattle's evening drizzle slicked the windows, diffusing the neon signs into hazy watercolor. Inside, Alex inspected a new batch of soy-glazed short ribs, their caramelized sheen catching the soft kitchen light. It was a dish he'd perfected over years, inspired by one he used to make with Grandpa Raymond. At 38, Alex was not just the executive chef, but the de facto visionary behind the bistro. Since returning from culinary school and a marketing degree 15 years ago, he'd turned what was once a modest family restaurant into a regional icon. Food and Wine had done a feature on their tangerine-glazed lobster. They had a viral following online, with short clips of Alex torching sashimi or plating delicate scallops, reaching thousands of eager fans. But for all the fame and long wait lists, something remained out of reach: recognition. His parents, Kenneth and Evelyn, still referred to him as "our chef" in interviews. Never partner, never co-owner, just the chef. The title stung more than he cared to admit. Kenneth, his father, handled the books and big-picture strategy, while Evelyn was the quiet diplomat smoothing over conflicts. They spoke glowingly of Alex's skill in the kitchen, but never quite included him in boardroom conversations. Alex wasn't looking for praise. What he wanted was trust, decision-making power. A seat at the table where the future of Parker's Bistro was mapped out. A table where he still felt like a guest, not a member. He leaned against the cold stainless steel counter, sipping a lukewarm coffee, and let his mind drift back to the early days. He could still see himself as a boy, barely tall enough to reach the stove, standing beside Grandpa Raymond in the original bistro, a rundown diner on the edge of Pike Place. Raymond, a stern but affectionate man, had believed in cooking with heart before precision. "You season with your soul, not your salt," he'd say, handing Alex a wooden spoon almost too big for his hands. Raymond had started the bistro in 1978, blending Asian fusion long before it was trendy. To the neighborhood, he was a culinary rebel. To Alex, he was the first person who truly saw him. Their bond had formed over chopping vegetables and long nights trying to get a soy-braised pork belly just right. Raymond had died before the restaurant became what it was now. But his legacy lived in every corner, in the old iron wok that still hung near the prep station, in the faded photo by the entrance of a much younger Alex, holding a ladle with pride. It was Raymond who first called Alex a chef long before anyone else did. That memory always warmed Alex, but tonight it came with a chill. Because no matter how far he'd brought the bistro, his parents never called him anything more than what he started as. It wasn't about vanity, it was about value. He'd built the menu from scratch, revived the brand, negotiated major contracts like the one with Pacific Lux Hotels, a $1 million partnership that brought their recipes to luxury suites across the West Coast. And yet decisions about expansion, franchising, or even sourcing new investors happened in closed-door meetings he wasn't invited to. Kenneth once brushed him off with, "Let the suits handle it, son. You just keep the food beautiful." That comment had stayed with him, resurfacing during long nights when he was alone in the office. Balancing budgets and supplier costs well beyond the scope of just cooking. Alex was proud of what he built. He didn't need applause. But as the bistro grew, so did his hunger for inclusion, for a title that matched his labor, for influence equal to his investment. He sighed and walked back out to the dining area. The last couple of tables were finishing up. A young couple clinked glasses of Sauvignon Blanc over the seared halibut, a dish Alex created for their spring menu. He caught the woman pointing toward the open kitchen window, smiling at him. He offered a polite nod. Moments like these reminded him why he stayed. but lately it felt like he was keeping something alive that didn't know he was its heartbeat. At the bar, Ryan, their floor manager, nodded. "Solid night. Full house again." Alex forced a smile. "Yeah." Ryan tilted his head. "Something up." Alex hesitated, then shook it off. "Just tired." He wasn't ready to say it aloud yet, but something inside him had begun to shift. It wasn't burnout. It was the quiet realization that he'd built something remarkable, but it might never fully belong to him. And something told him the next family meeting would make that crystal clear. The week following the dinner rush felt unusually calm, but underneath Alex Parker's skin a storm brewed. The family meeting had been scheduled for Thursday morning, a rare instance when the bistro would remain closed for lunch service. Kenneth said it was about strategy, a word that always made Alex wary. Something about his father's tone during the announcement had sounded final. The private dining room hadn't changed since Grandpa Raymond's days. Its cherry wood table stretched the length of the room, flanked by high-backed chairs. Old photos lined the walls, black and white moments from decades past. Alex's favorite was one with Raymond standing behind the original bistro's counter, sleeves rolled up, smile crooked, a young Alex beside him gripping a wooden spoon like a sword. Alex arrived first as always. He brought his own coffee in a dented thermos, the kind you only keep if it's seen years of long nights and hard-won mornings. He set his notebook on the table, glanced once at the empty chair where his grandfather used to sit, then faced the door. Kenneth and Evelyn walked in 10 minutes later. Kenneth's leather briefcase clunked onto the table with weight both literal and symbolic. Evelyn carried a notepad but offered no smile. They exchanged quiet greetings, formal for a family who'd spent the last decade shoulder to shoulder in business. Then came Chris. He walked in with that same effortless stride he had since college. Polished shoes, a blazer too sharp for a restaurant that served miso cod, and that tech startup air that followed him like a scent. Chris Parker, the youngest, the MBA holder, the consultant who'd once worked for a private equity firm that promised to revolutionize small business strategies. He kissed their mother on the cheek and offered Alex a nod that felt more like a formality than family. Alex nodded back, jaw tight. Kenneth got right to it. "We won't draw this out. We've made a decision about Parker's Bistro's future, one we believe is necessary for growth." Alex leaned in slightly. The kind of lean that carried hope, not expectation. Kenneth cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have decided it's time to formally name a CEO, and after much discussion we've chosen Chris to take on that role." The room fell so quiet Alex could hear the hum of the walk-in fridge next door. "What?" he said finally. Not with anger, just disbelief. Chris gave a half-smile like he'd been preparing for this moment. "It's a big step for the bistro, Alex, but I'm ready to scale it, streamline things, bring in systems." "You're ready," Alex said, blinking. "You don't even know how our inventory works. You couldn't organize Mom's 60th, half the catering was late. You served store-bought cake." "That was logistics," Chris replied coolly. "This is leadership." Kenneth interjected, tone even almost rehearsed. "You've been the creative core, Alex. No one's questioning your contribution, but to go national, we need someone who thinks like a strategist." Alex's breath caught in his throat. National. When had that conversation happened? Certainly not in the meetings he'd attended. "So after 12 years of building this place, getting us in food and wine, negotiating with Pacific Lux, I get sidelined for someone who's never spent a Saturday night here during rush hour." "You're still head of culinary," Evelyn said, voice soft but firm. "We're not taking anything from you." Alex looked between them. His mother's eyes didn't meet his. Chris just kept tapping a pen on the table like he was already chairing meetings. "That's not partnership," Alex said. "That's being kept in the kitchen." Chris smiled again, that infuriating MBA smile. Alex, you're amazing with food. No one's saying otherwise, but you get caught up in the details, artisan, this premium that we need scale, simplicity. I'm thinking less tangerine lobster, more fusion bowls. Alex stood slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just looked at the people who moments ago he still believed saw his worth. I hope your frozen shrimp tastes like legacy, he said, and with that he walked out. Back in the kitchen, silence greeted him like an old friend. Ryan, who had been prepping for the day, looked up, sensing something was off. You okay? Alex didn't answer right away. He washed his hands at the sink water, scalding, then dried them slowly. They gave Chris the CEO role. Ryan's knife paused mid-dice. You're kidding. Nope. But you... Alex cut him off with a shrug. Apparently my vision's too artisanal. The rest of the day blurred. Chris hovered more than usual, already acting like a boss. He met with marketing without consulting Alex. He jotted notes about menu redundancies. By evening, he had an intern from his consulting days reviewing supplier invoices. And Evelyn. She was silent, polite, as if that made the betrayal easier to digest. That night, Alex called Holly, an old culinary school friend and now owner of Lotus Erie. They met at a diner in Belltown. Over fries and stale coffee, he told her everything. Holly, practical and sharp as ever, didn't flinch. If this was a job, would you stay? No, Alex said. Then why are you still there? Because it's my family. She looked him dead in the eyes. And they're treating you like a contractor, not family. You built something. If they can't see it, show them what it looks like without you. Alex didn't answer, but something shifted. He wasn't just disappointed anymore. He was ready. That weekend, he started compiling everything: his recipes, supplier contracts, pitch decks for Pacific Lux, content calendars for social media. These weren't just files, they were pieces of himself stitched together over 12 years. Chris had a plan, sure, but Alex had a legacy, and he was done leaving it in someone else's hands. It didn't take long for the consequences of the boardroom decision to ripple through the walls of Parker's Bistro. Chris barely settled into his self-appointed corner office, began his so-called optimization plan with ruthless efficiency. He called it strategic streamlining. To Alex, it felt like dismantling a cathedral with a chainsaw. The first blow came on a Tuesday morning. Alex walked into the kitchen and found the printed menu for next week on the prep counter. Something looked off. His signature tasting dishes, miso cod yuzu scallops, the tangerine lobster that had once gone viral, were missing. In their place, chef's special burger and house stir-fry. He stormed into the front office. Chris was there, flanked by his startup-era friend Leo, who was now apparently interim operations advisor. "What is this?" Alex asked, waving the paper. Chris looked up from his laptop. "Oh, that. Yeah, we're simplifying. These new items scale better, fast to prep, fewer premium ingredients." "You cut half the tasting menu." "I prefer to think of it as optimizing the culinary pipeline." Alex blinked. "Do you even hear yourself?" Chris stood, voice syrupy smooth. "Alex, our margin on those fancy scallops was terrible. This isn't about ego, it's about viability. We need to think multi-location, multi-market, like chains do." "We're not a chain, we're a brand. One people trust." Chris shrugged. "Not if we keep bleeding cash." By Friday, Chris had sent an internal memo instructing all line cooks to prioritize menu consistency and reducing time-consuming preparations. It didn't just change how things were made, it erased the artistry. Ryan, the long-serving manager who had once called Alex the soul of the bistro, knocked on Alex's office door later that evening. "Can we talk?" Alex nodded, already knowing what was coming. "This isn't working, man. Chris is telling the kitchen to use frozen seafood. Denise called me. She got a request to switch all our weekly scallop orders to pre-cooked shrimp. Alex's jaw tightened. That's not our standard. He says it's industry efficiency, but it's garbage, and the team knows it. Morale's tanking. Denise Hart, their seafood supplier for nearly a decade, confirmed it that weekend. Chris emailed me saying we're moving to frozen because it cuts costs. I didn't even think it was real until I called the office and he answered like he runs the place. He thinks he does, Alex said bitterly. The worst blow came the following Monday. Alex arrived early to prep for the monthly chef's tasting event, a night that usually sold out weeks in advance, and attracted bloggers, influencers, and sometimes even critics from the Seattle Times. It was his pride. He stepped into the dining room and stopped cold. The chalkboard menu had been updated. His name, Chef Alex's monthly tasting, was gone. The event was now listed as Bistro Experience Night, curated by executive team. He turned to find Chris standing nearby, clipboard in hand. You removed my name. We're building a team-oriented culture. It's about brand, not personality. Brand, you mean the one built on the personality you're erasing? Chris raised an eyebrow. Don't be dramatic. You're still here, technically. Later that day, during a vendor call with a new wine distributor, Chris introduced Alex as our kitchen operator. Not executive chef, not co-founder, not creative director. Kitchen operator. Alex clenched his fists under the table. That night he couldn't sleep. He stood on the fire escape outside his apartment, the Seattle skyline glowing in the dark. All around him, things moved forward, construction cranes, ferries, people. But he felt stuck, anchored to a ship that was changing its name mid-sail. He kept thinking about a moment from his childhood, watching his grandfather Raymond in the kitchen, gently showing him how to fillet a halibut. You treat each fish like it's your first, Raymond had said. That's how you build trust, one plate at a time. And now his brother was tossing that philosophy for frozen shrimp and scalable menus. Maybe Holly had been right. Maybe staying was no longer loyalty. Maybe it was self-betrayal. Alex returned to work the next day with a knot in his chest. Ryan pulled him aside. The staff's confused. They don't know who to follow, you or Chris, and honestly, neither do I anymore. Alex looked him in the eye. Then maybe it's time someone made that clear. He wasn't ready to quit. Not yet. But the first crack had deepened, and soon the whole foundation would start to crumble. It started like any other Friday. Alex arrived early, sleeves rolled, checking on prep stations before the usual staff meeting. The kitchen was humming, though not in its usual rhythm. Whispers passed between stations. The mood was off. That morning, Chris had sent out a cryptic email, major menu realignment. Will be discussed at 10 a.m., mandatory attendance. Alex didn't like the sound of it. At 10:05 a.m., everyone was gathered in the private dining room, his team, his family, and now his replacement. Alex sat quietly, flanked by Ryan and Kristen. Denise leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. Chris strolled in late, as he often did now, wearing a blazer and no tie like he thought it made him look visionary. He didn't greet anyone, just flipped open his laptop and placed a few printed spreadsheets on the table. I'll get right to the point, he said, adjusting his collar. After reviewing costs and customer flow, we've decided to retire 3 dishes that are underperforming from a scalability perspective. Alex felt a pulse in his neck. Chris clicked to the next slide. The lobster glaze, the seared scallops, and the yuzu cod will be removed from the menu effective Monday. The room fell into silence like a dropped plate. Denise muttered something under her breath. Kristen blinked hard, her jaw tight. Alex sat still for a second, then slowly stood. You're cutting our 3 best-reviewed dishes, he said evenly. The lobster glaze has a wait list 3 weeks long. The scallops are our most shared dish on social media. And the cod, it's a signature. People come here for that cod. Chris didn't look up from his slides. Those dishes require expensive ingredients, complicated prep, and don't align with the new direction. We need to streamline. Burgers, fried rice, stir-fries, stuff people recognize. Things we can roll out nationally. You mean things you can mass-produce, Alex snapped. You're replacing soul with volume. This isn't about soul, Chris replied flatly. It's about margins and vision. Alex looked around the room. Ryan looked at the table. Kristen met his eyes briefly apologetically. Denise's arms were still crossed, but her silence was shouting. He turned back to Chris. You can't lead with spreadsheets and expect loyalty from a kitchen. You don't understand this place. You never did. Chris finally looked up, meeting Alex's gaze. That's why you're here to cook. I'm here to lead. The sentence struck like a punch. Excuse me, Alex asked, voice dangerously quiet. You're the kitchen operator, Chris said, unbothered. You make the food, I make the decisions. Alex didn't shout. He didn't throw anything, though his hands shook. He reached into the folder he brought mostly notes from a new tasting room that Chris would now never see and pulled out a sealed envelope. He walked to the front of the room and placed it on the table in front of Chris. I'm done, he said, effective immediately. Chris blinked. You're resigning, I am, Alex confirmed, because I refuse to be managed by someone who thinks fresh seafood is inefficient and a chef is just a machine. Kenneth, their father, had been quiet until now. Alex, don't do this. Alex turned to him, voice steadier than he felt. I already did when you let this happen. Evelyn, his mother's still fingers wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee. She said nothing, as always. To his staff, Alex said, I love this place. I love all of you, but this isn't Parker's Bistro anymore. It's something else. I wish you luck. You'll need it. He walked out without another word. Out through the kitchen, past the prep table where he'd once taught Kristen how to julienne, past the spice rack he'd spent months curating. Out into the alley, the cold Seattle air wrapping him in silence. He walked aimless through Pike Place, past stalls that smelled of citrus and sea salt, past the herb vendors that used to know his name. His heart hurt, not with regret but with loss. Not just of a job, but of belief that loyalty would eventually be seen, that hard work would speak for itself. After nearly an hour of wandering, he found himself on a quiet street in Fremont, standing outside a red brick house lit by hanging lanterns. He didn't knock. Holly opened the door before he raised his hand. She just looked at him. You walked, she said. I walked. You okay? No, he admitted. Good. She led him to the backyard where two old lawn chairs sat under string lights. They each grabbed a beer. No words needed. They drank slowly. The air was sharp, but the silence was warm. Eventually, Holly said, You finally stopped waiting for them to see you. Alex nodded. Now I just need to figure out who I am without them. You're more than Parker's, she said. You always were. The beer was bitter and cold. It tasted like a beginning. That night, Alex didn't plan his next move. He didn't talk about food or strategy or branding. He sat with a friend under the stars and felt something new settle in his chest, freedom. The morning after his resignation, Alex awoke in the dark. For a moment, muscle memory kicked in, reach for the phone check, the schedule skim, the emails call, the supplier text Ryan. A reminder about the produce delivery. But the phone was silent, no vibrations, no calendar alerts, no new messages. The house was still. Alex lay in bed staring at the ceiling of his small one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. It was the first time in over a decade he'd woken up without needing to answer to anyone. No shift schedules, no tasting menus, no investor meetings, no family. At first, the quiet felt like a betrayal. He moved through the day like someone recovering from surgery, slow, stiff, unsure if he'd healed or if the pain was simply hiding under anesthesia. The fridge was empty except for beer and half a jar of pickles. The kitchen, though small, looked untouched, sterile. He hadn't cooked for himself in years. He walked to the corner market and bought salmon, lemon, butter, dill. No fancy truffle oil, no imported garnishes, just ingredients. Back home, he opened the windows, let the winter air in, and stood barefoot on cold tile. The motions of cooking came back like a melody he hadn't played in years. He salted the salmon like his grandfather Raymond taught him, using his fingers instead of a spoon. He seared the fillet skin down in a cast-iron skillet, and when the crackle hit his ears, something inside him unknotted. He plated it, simply squeezed lemon over the top, and took his first bite standing over the sink. It wasn't perfect. The skin was a little too crisp, but it was real. He chewed slowly, eyes closing, and remembered. 12 years old, standing on a stool in his family's old kitchen, watching Raymond guide his hands with a wooden spoon. They'd made the same dish. Alex had insisted on serving it to his mother that night, candles lit, napkins folded like fans. She said it was too salty, but she smiled when she said it. She'd kissed his forehead. Back then, Parker's Bistro didn't exist. Back then, food was still joy, not identity. The memory burned brighter than anything in the restaurant's polished history. Each morning that week, Alex repeated the same ritual. No phone, no news, no schedule. Just one dish. Scrambled eggs with rosemary, broiled asparagus, a perfect cup of black coffee. One afternoon, while roasting chicken thighs, he caught himself humming. He stopped, surprised by the sound, as if it had come from someone else. He sat on his couch that evening, lights low, a soft jazz record spinning from the speaker, and let himself feel the weight of what he'd lost. Not just the job or the kitchen, but the illusion that he had ever truly belonged there. It wasn't just Chris who had pushed him out. It was the years of slow erosion of never being enough in their eyes. He had built Parker's with his hands, but never once had his father told him, "You did this." Raymond would have known what to say. Alex stood, walked to his bookshelf, and pulled down a photo album he hadn't touched since the move. Flipping past pages of family vacations, holiday dinners, and blurry birthday cakes, he landed on a photo of him and Raymond in front of a fishing boat holding up a silver salmon nearly half Alex's size. There was a note scribbled on the back in Raymond's handwriting. "The first catch. Don't forget where flavor begins." The words hit him like scripture. 3 days later, Holly showed up. She didn't knock, just walked in with 2 cups of coffee and a bag of fresh bread from the bakery across the street. "You look like someone who's slept for a week and hasn't decided whether to rejoin society," she said, dropping into the armchair beside him. Alex raised an eyebrow. "I'm in hibernation." "Well," she said, "sipping even bears come out eventually." They sat in silence for a while. Jazz hummed in the background. The window was open slightly and the wind stirred the curtains. Then Holly said, "So, no Parkers, no kitchen, no calendar. Who are you now?" The question landed softly, but it echoed loud. Alex didn't answer immediately. He looked at his hands that had chopped 1,000 onions. Whisked cream into peaks, held burning pans, folded napkins for weddings. Stitched cuts with butterfly bandages lifted teammates out of breakdowns. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "I was always the guy holding everything together. The menu, the kitchen, the family. Without that, you're not the glue anymore," Holly finished. "So maybe you get to be something else." He smiled weakly. "Maybe I don't want to be glue." Holly leaned forward. "Then don't. Be fire, be salt, be something that doesn't hold people together but brings them to the table." That night, Alex sat alone, staring at the blank wall in his kitchen. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel afraid of starting over. He felt curious. The silence didn't last long. 3 days after Holly's visit, Alex's phone started to ring again. First it was Ryan, his voice hushed and chaotic. "Chris cut prep staff hours," Ryan whispered. "He wants to do half the line with 2 temps. Yesterday he suggested we freeze the sauces and reheat them. Alex, he's dismantling everything." Denise called later that afternoon. Her tone was sharp-clipped. "Chris tried ordering frozen halibut from a bulk distributor in Chicago," she spat. "I've supplied your kitchen for 9 years. Now he wants to replace me with—" Costco Alex didn't know what to say. He just listened. That was all they needed. Then came the messages from former regulars, emails, social media tags, even a handwritten letter from an elderly couple who used to come every Sunday. "We came in last night and the scallops were gone," one email read. "They gave us sliders. It felt like a funeral." But it was the call from Pacific Lux Hotels that broke something open. The voice on the other end was Martin Langston, head of culinary partnerships. "I sat through a presentation with Chris yesterday," Martin said dryly. "He pitched frozen tapas and QR-coded menus. When I asked about the seasonal tasting, he said it was phased out." There was a long pause. Then the shift. "Alex, if you ever start something of your own," Martin said, voice lower now, "you call me first. We'll back it." Alex didn't speak at first. He let the words settle. For years he'd believed his power came from the name Parker's Bistro, from the walls and the branding and the awards. But in that moment he saw the truth. His value wasn't in the name. It was in the trust. People hadn't come for Parker's. They had come for him. And no one, not Chris, not his father, not even the bistro itself, could ever replicate that. Not really. The offer from Martin at Pacific Lux lingered in Alex's thoughts like the scent of fresh rosemary, unexpected but strangely comforting. It wasn't revenge that stirred him. It wasn't pride. It was something quieter, deeper, a calling he hadn't heard clearly in years. He didn't want to rebuild Parker's or prove Chris wrong. He just wanted to build something true. He took long walks through the neighborhoods of Seattle, tracing memories along brick buildings and tree-lined avenues. One rainy afternoon, he stopped in front of an old bakery on East Pine. The sign was faded, the windows dusted over. A 4-lease paper peeled slightly at the corners. It wasn't large. It wasn't glamorous. But something about it felt right, like it was waiting. That night, Alex told Holly. She listened quietly, then smiled. "I want in." "You've already done the grind," he said. "You've earned your piece." She laughed. "So have you. Doesn't mean I don't miss the chaos." He thought about it, really thought. But deep down, he knew this had to be his alone. He had to know what he could build with just his hands and his vision, without any Parker name, without any backup. "I have to do this solo," he said gently. Holly didn't flinch. "Then I'll be your first reservation." The next day, Alex signed the lease. He didn't have a full plan, just a notebook of scribbled recipes and sketches. He named the place Alex's Table. Simple, honest, his. He painted the walls himself, tore out the old counters, scrubbed the grease off ceiling fans. It was exhausting work, but every ache in his arms reminded him this was his. He began making calls. Ryan didn't hesitate. Say when he said, "I'm already packing my knives." Denise sent a truck of fresh produce the next morning free of charge. Kristen cried when he called. "I thought I'd never get to plate scallops again," she whispered. One by one, the pieces returned, not as part of Parker's legacy, but as part of Alex's future. At the end of a long day, sanding floors, Alex stood in the center of the bare dining space. It smelled like sawdust and citrus oil. The walls were white. The floors gleamed faintly in the late sun. He pulled a black marker from his back pocket and walked to the wall facing the entrance. With slow, deliberate strokes, he sketched the outline of the kitchen, the flow of movement, the placement of tables. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was his. And for the first time, that was enough. There's a kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones, not just from lack of sleep, but from carrying something too long. That was how Alex felt in the early days of building Alex's table. It started before dawn and ended well past midnight, every day blurring into the next. The process was relentless. The permits were delayed. The grease trap had to be replaced. The fire suppression system failed its first inspection. The bank needed 3 years of projections, full financials, and a marketing plan. He spent his mornings at city offices arguing with inspectors, his afternoons calling suppliers and installing fixtures, and his nights, his sacred quiet nights, cooking. Alone. Alex didn't complain. He welcomed the chaos. It was proof he was alive. After 12 years of running a kitchen designed by someone else's rules, he was now building his own world, brick by brick, plate by plate. The physical labor was brutal. He scrubbed years of grime from the bakery's tiled floors, removed rusted shelving, patched drywall, and hand-sanded every inch of reclaimed oak he planned to use for the communal table. He lost track of the bruises on his hands. His back ached. His knees cracked. He slept on a cot in the office some nights, too tired to drive home. But there was no bitterness, just hunger. Not for revenge, he had moved past that, but for creation. Every night around 10 p.m. when the sawdust settled and the streetlights outside cast golden bars across the floor, Alex cooked. That was when the noise quieted, when he could return to the craft itself, the thing that had saved him again and again. He became obsessed with one dish, seared yuzu halibut. It began as a sketch in his journal and slowly evolved. Pacific halibut seared skin side down until crisp, resting on a bed of charred scallion puree. He paired it with pickled daikon and finished it with a yuzu sake glaze that shimmered under candlelight. The balance of acid and umami, the tenderness of the fish, the bitterness of the char, each element spoke to his journey. It was the first dish in a long time that felt entirely his. At 2:13 a.m. one night, while adjusting the salt ratio in the glaze, his phone buzzed. "Ryan." Alex wiped his hands, answered. "Hey, Ryan," said, his voice tired. "You up always? Chris just fired 3 people, line cooks, said the labor cost's too high." Alex said nothing, waiting. "There's no leadership, man. Kristen's running the pass alone. The new Sue doesn't even know how to prep beurre blanc. A VIP left mid-meal yesterday. It's falling apart." Still Alex stayed quiet. Ryan exhaled. "Just thought you'd want to know." Alex looked down at his station. The halibut was perfectly seared. Steam rose gently from the plate. The glaze caught the light like lacquered gold. "I appreciate it," Alex said. "Truly." Ryan hesitated. "You okay?" Alex smiled faintly. "Yeah, I'm working." After the call, he plated another dish, not for service, not for critique, but to feel the rhythm in his hands. He checked his dough rising near the window, adjusted the oven temp. Tasted the glaze again. There was no applause, no critics, no board meetings, just him and the fire. He worked that way for weeks, writing menu ideas on napkins, experimenting with fermentation, sourcing ingredients directly from farmers. He visited mushroom foragers in Tacoma, tested loaves at 4 a.m., brewed miso in mason jars. He found a local ceramicist to craft imperfect, beautiful plates that felt like they belonged in someone's home. Not a hotel. He wasn't building a restaurant. He was building a philosophy. And through it all, he didn't check in on Parker's Bistro. He didn't track their social media or read their reviews. He wasn't interested in Chris's collapse or Kenneth's regret. That chapter was over. One morning just before sunrise, he stood outside the restaurant's glass doors, sipping burnt coffee from a thermos, and watching the reflection of the city behind him. The sign above the entrance hadn't been hung yet, but in his mind it was already there, Alex's table. He took a deep breath, exhaled, and walked back inside. The dough was ready to bake. The sauce had rested long enough. It was time to build something that couldn't be copied. Opening night arrived not with fanfare, but with the quiet grace of something real finally beginning. It was a rainy Thursday in Seattle, the kind of evening where the world felt like it was exhaling. Inside Alex's table, the lights glowed low and warm, bouncing off polished wood and hand-thrown pottery. No streamers, no celebrity guests, just 32 chairs, a pared-back menu, and the hum of anticipation. Alex stood near the kitchen, past his chef's coat, crisp but unbranded. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind anyone's name, not even his own. This restaurant wasn't about ego, it was about invitation. The first guests trickled in around 6. Familiar faces. Longtime patrons of Parker's who had followed the whispers about something new. Couples who had celebrated anniversaries with Alex's scallops friends who used to linger over dessert at the old bistro bar, even a local teacher who had once written a thank you note after her retirement dinner. They were here because they remembered not just the food but how they felt eating it. Holly arrived with a bottle of Oregon Pinot and a quiet smile. She hugged Alex tightly and stepped back with tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "And it's beautiful." Ryan was already in motion, managing the front with calm energy. Kristen wore her crisp whites, proudly directing her 2-line cooks with the kind of rhythm only found in teams who trust one another deeply. Denise showed up at the back door an hour before service with 2 crates of golden oyster mushrooms and a handwritten card. "Thought you could use something with soul," she said. The evening began gently. Soft jazz played on vinyl. Candles flickered on each table. The scent of roasted garlic and lemon thyme butter filled the air. The seared yuzu halibut was the first dish out. It went to table 3, an elderly couple who used to sit at the chef's counter at Parker's every other Sunday. The woman gasped slightly when she took her first bite. "This is it," she said. "This is the one we loved." Alex smiled. "It's a little different now. A bit more yuzu, a bit less butter." She nodded, teary-eyed. "It's deeper. You can taste the history." Other familiar dishes returned in new forms. The lobster citrus gnocchi, now named Raymond's shells in honor of his grandfather. The 3-herb brioche inspired by his mother's Sunday rolls. Each plate was not just a dish, it was a story reclaimed. Around 7:30 p.m., a quiet man in a navy wool coat stepped in. No reservation, no entourage. Eric from Pacific Lux. He sat at a corner table and ordered the tasting menu without fanfare. Throughout the meal, he said little. He watched, listened, tasted slowly. Alex plated the dessert himself, a smoked maple creme brulee with matcha dust. When he brought it to the table, Eric looked up and finally smiled. "This," he said, "is what hospitality is supposed to feel like." Then he reached into his coat and handed Alex an envelope. Inside was a proposal, a $500,000 contract for seasonal collaboration with Pacific Lux Hotels. No chains, no licensing, just curated seasonal menus crafted by Alex and his team, distributed to 5 boutique properties. "It's not $1 million, Eric said, "but it's yours. No investors, no boards, just food and trust." Alex didn't answer right away. He just nodded, eyes wet. He signed the contract the next morning. By the weekend, reviews began trickling in. One in particular stood out. A critic from Seattle Eats who had never once praised Parker's Bistro wrote, "Dining at Alex's table is like having dinner with someone who's finally allowed to speak." The dishes echo Parker's past, but with more clarity, more grace. "It's like eating a story that was never told until now." Alex printed it out and taped it to the kitchen wall beside the prep list. After midnight, when the last guest left and the crew began cleaning, Alex stood in the dining room alone. The warmth of the night still lingered. The plates had been cleared, the glasses were drying. He looked around and thought not of victory, but of peace. He didn't need more tables. He didn't need to franchise. He just needed this moment, this team, this second chance. Then his phone buzzed, a number he hadn't saved in over a year. He hesitated, staring at the screen. Finally, he picked up. "Hi, Alex," came the voice, so unsure, his mother. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I was wondering if we could talk. Just the two of us, if you have time." Alex didn't answer immediately. He looked around the empty restaurant, the one he built from nothing but faith and fire. And then gently he said, "Okay, let's talk." They met at a quiet cafe on Mercer Street, far from the noise of the restaurant world. Alex had chosen the spot because it was neutral. No kitchen, no knives, just 2 cups of coffee and a window seat overlooking the rainy street. His mother arrived 10 minutes early, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. She looked older, more fragile somehow. Her usual elegance softened by something unspoken. When Alex sat down, she didn't reach for a hug. She just looked at him. "I've been rehearsing this," she said. "But now that you're here, I don't think I should." Alex waited. "I was wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought staying quiet was keeping peace. I thought letting your father lead and letting Chris take charge would somehow hold the family together." She blinked, fast, lips trembling. "But all I did was lose you." Alex didn't speak right away. The air between them was thick, not with anger, but with years of missed conversations. "I needed you to stand up for me," he said softly, "not as your son. As a man." "I know," she whispered. "I see that now." She reached across the table, unsure, and rested her fingers gently over his hand. "I'm sorry, Alex." He nodded, and for the first time in a long time it felt like she meant it. A week later, Chris called. Alex debated whether to answer, but curiosity and maybe a little compassion won out. "Hey, Chris," said flat. No small talk. There was a long pause. "I thought being CEO would be different, simpler, like a playbook. Make the numbers work, keep the team in line. But it's not." Another pause. "I didn't know how hard it would be," he admitted. "I don't think I ever understood what you carried." Alex didn't gloat. He didn't bite back. "Now you do," he said gently. Chris exhaled. "I don't expect anything from you. I just needed to say it." There was a silence, heavy but not bitter. "Take care of yourself, Chris," Alex said before hanging up. And that was enough. His father came on a Tuesday. No announcement, no reservation. Just Kenneth Parker standing in the doorway of Alex's table at 5:45 p.m. right before service. He sat alone at the back corner near the window. Ryan approached to seat him, but Alex shook his head. He'd handle it himself. He brought the menu, poured water, and said nothing more than enjoy. Kenneth ordered the halibut. He ate slowly, every bite deliberate. He didn't look around, didn't make notes, didn't comment. When the plate was cleared, he asked for coffee. Alex brought it himself. As he placed the cup down, Kenneth finally spoke. "You've made something enduring," he said, staring into the steam. "This place has something Parker's never did. Heart. You can feel it in the staff, the space, the way the food arrives." He looked up at his son, eyes damp. "You've done something your grandfather would be proud of." That was all. No apology, no speech. But it was more than Alex had ever heard, and it was enough. That night after service ended, Alex stood alone in the dining room. The lights were still low, the music had faded to soft piano, laughter had echoed through the space hours earlier, and the warmth still lingered. From the kitchen, the faint sound of dishes being stacked and stories being shared drifted into the room. Denise was humming something. Kristen was laughing about a brulee mishap. Ryan was probably already triple-checking tomorrow's reservations. Alex turned off the final overhead light and stepped outside into the cool Seattle air. He looked back through the glass at the glowing interior. The tables, the shelves lined with hand-thrown bowls, the wall where he had once drawn his dream in black marker. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a declaration. He hadn't just walked away from a family business. He had stepped fully into himself, into the legacy that mattered most, his own.